Let me tell you something. One of the coldest feelings in the world is watching somebody you loved walk away and choose somebody else like everything you gave them meant nothing. That pain will make you question yourself. It'll make you stand in the mirror wondering what was wrong with you. You start replaying conversations in your head. You start comparing yourself to the other person. And before you know it, heartbreak has turned into self-doubt. But listen to me carefully today. Just because somebody failed to recognize your value does not mean you had none. See, a lot of people think the answer after betrayal is revenge. They think the answer is getting even, making the other person jealous, or proving they lost the best thing they ever had. But real power is much quieter than that. Real power is healing without becoming bitter. Real power is rebuilding yourself while they expect you to break. Real power is becoming so strong mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically, that one day you look back at the pain and realize it introduced you to a version of yourself you would have never discovered otherwise. Because sometimes people leave good relationships chasing temporary excitement. Sometimes they mistake attention for love. Sometimes they abandon loyalty because they are emotionally immature and don't understand what they had until life teaches them the hard way. But your job is not to chase people who walked away. Your job is to remember who you are. And today, we're going to talk about exactly what happens when somebody leaves you for someone else, why begging never works, why silence is powerful, and how the moment you stop chasing validation is the exact moment your life begins changing for the better. Because the truth is, the person who got left behind is not always the person who loses, Doc. One of the biggest mistakes people make after being left for someone else is believing they suddenly have to compete for their worth. The moment that breakup happens, insecurity creeps in quietly. You start comparing yourself to the other person. You look at their appearance, their lifestyle, their personality, and you begin asking dangerous questions in your mind. What do they have that I don't? Why was I not enough? What could I have done differently? And before you know it, you are mentally standing in a competition you were never supposed to enter in the first place. See, real love is not supposed to feel like an audition. You should never have to convince somebody to value loyalty, honesty, consistency, and genuine care. Those things are already priceless. But when somebody leaves you for someone else, your emotions can trick you into thinking you lost to a better option. That is not always true. Sometimes people simply chase excitement over stability. Sometimes they confuse temporary feelings with real connection. And sometimes people walk away from good relationships because they are emotionally immature and don't understand what they already had. But the dangerous part is what heartbreak does to your self-esteem if you allow it. You begin shrinking yourself trying to understand their decision. You replay every conversation in your head. You overanalyze your flaws. You suddenly become obsessed with fixing things about yourself that never needed fixing. And now, instead of healing, you are trying to earn back validation from somebody who willingly walked away. That will drain your spirit every single time. Because when you start competing for a spot you already deserve, you automatically lower your own value. Think about it. If you were loyal, supportive, loving, patient, and genuine, why should you have to beg somebody to recognize that? Why should you have to prove your worth after already giving your heart honestly? The truth is, the right person does not need to be convinced to appreciate you. Mature love recognizes value naturally. Now, that does not mean you are perfect. Nobody is. Every relationship has areas that can improve. But there is a difference between healthy self-reflection and self-destruction. Healthy reflection says, I can grow from this. Self-destruction says, I wasn't enough. And those are two completely different mindsets. You cannot allow another person's choices to become your identity. Sometimes people leave because they are chasing fantasy. They see something new and exciting and mistake that temporary rush for happiness. But temporary excitement fades. Reality always shows up eventually. And when it does, many people realize too late that they traded something real for something temporary. But by then, the person they left behind has either become stronger or completely broken. And this is where your mindset matters most. You have to stop seeing yourself as someone who got replaced. Human beings are not objects. Love is not a ranking system. Somebody choosing another path does not erase your value. It only reveals their priorities, their maturity level, and their emotional capacity at that moment. The strongest thing you can do after betrayal is refuse to compete. Do not fight for attention. Do not beg for explanations. Do not chase closure from somebody committed to misunderstanding your worth. Do not turn yourself into somebody else just to be chosen. Because the moment you abandon your dignity trying to hold on to somebody, you begin losing the very qualities that made you valuable in the first place. Confidence is attractive. Self-respect is powerful. Emotional control is unforgettable. And nothing confuses people more than someone who chooses peace over desperation. See, many people expect heartbreak to make you collapse. They expect you to cry publicly, react emotionally, and lose your confidence. But when you quietly focus on yourself instead, something powerful happens. Your energy changes, your posture changes, your mindset changes. You stop looking for validation outside yourself. And that is when healing truly begins. Because the goal is not to win them back. The goal is to never lose yourself again. You have to remember who you were before you started tying your worth to another person's approval. You have to reconnect with your confidence, your purpose, your peace, your discipline, and your identity outside the relationship. The moment you realize your value is not dependent on being chosen by one person, you become emotionally free. And here's the truth nobody talks about enough. The person who walks away is not always the winner. Sometimes the real winner is the person who got hurt, healed, learned, evolved, and came back stronger than ever. The person who rebuilt their confidence instead of chasing validation. The person who discovered their own worth after somebody else failed to appreciate it. That kind of growth changes your entire life. Because once you truly understand your value, you stop begging for seats at tables you already brought greatness to. One of the most powerful things you can learn after heartbreak is this: silence has a different kind of strength. Most people think power comes from shouting, arguing, exposing, or proving a point. But when somebody hurts you, especially when they leave you for someone else, emotional reactions become predictable. People expect tears. They expect begging. They expect long messages, emotional breakdowns, angry phone calls, and desperate attempts to hold on. That is the reaction most people prepare themselves for. But what truly unsettles people is calmness. When somebody walks away expecting you to collapse, and instead they see you standing in self-respect, something changes psychologically. Your silence forces them to sit with their own choices. It removes the emotional control they thought they had over you. See, many people gain confidence from knowing they can still affect your emotions whenever they want. They expect access to your pain. They expect to see evidence that you are still emotionally trapped. But when you stop performing heartbreak for the world, and start healing privately, you create a kind of mystery they cannot control. That does not mean pretending you are not hurt. Let's be honest, betrayal hurts deeply. Anybody telling you otherwise is lying. When somebody you trusted chooses another person, it can shake your confidence and make you question everything. But emotional maturity is not about avoiding pain. It is about learning how to carry pain without letting it destroy your dignity. There is a difference between expressing emotions and surrendering your self-respect. Some people react emotionally because they believe if they explain enough, cry enough, or fight hard enough, the other person will suddenly realize their value and come back. But you cannot convince somebody to appreciate what they were willing to risk losing. Real realization usually happens in absence, not arguments. That is why silence becomes powerful. Silence gives you space to think clearly instead of emotionally. It protects you from saying things you will regret later. It prevents you from chasing people who already made a decision. And most importantly, silence allows healing to begin. See, every time you constantly check their social media, send emotional paragraphs, or try to monitor their new relationship, you reopen your own wounds. You stay emotionally connected to somebody who is no longer protecting your heart. That attachment keeps you stuck in pain longer than necessary. But silence breaks that cycle. Silence says, I will not beg for what should have been freely given. Silence says, I refuse to lose my dignity trying to keep someone who already let go. Silence says, I am hurting, but I am still in control of myself. And let me tell you something important. People pay attention to energy more than words. Anybody can say they are doing fine, but when somebody sees you becoming calmer, more focused, more disciplined, and emotionally grounded after heartbreak, that creates impact. Your growth starts speaking louder than your pain ever could. That is why emotional control is one of the rarest forms of strength today. We live in a world where people react instantly. They post every emotion online. They seek validation for every wound. They make emotional decisions in temporary moments of pain. But the people who truly grow are the ones who learn how to process emotions privately while rebuilding themselves publicly. And understand this clearly. Silence is not weakness. Weakness is losing yourself trying to force someone to love you correctly. Weakness is abandoning your dignity for temporary attention. Weakness is allowing heartbreak to turn you bitter, desperate, or self-destructive. But silence with purpose, that takes discipline. Because there will be nights you want answers. There will be moments you want revenge. There will be times you want them to feel your pain. But healing begins when you stop making your life about their reaction. You stop trying to prove your worth. You stop trying to make them jealous. You stop hoping every post they make is secretly about you. Instead, your focus shifts inward. You start improving your mind. You start protecting your peace. You reconnect with your goals. You rebuild your confidence. You become stronger emotionally, spiritually, mentally, and physically. And something incredible happens during that process. The person who once felt abandoned begins to rediscover themselves. See, heartbreak has a way of revealing where your identity was too dependent on another person. Sometimes losing somebody exposes how much you neglected yourself while trying to maintain the relationship. And silence gives you the space to correct that. Now, instead of chasing closure, you create your own. Instead of demanding validation, you build self-worth. Instead of reacting emotionally, you move strategically. And eventually, your peace becomes more valuable than the relationship you lost. That is real growth. Because the truth is, not every battle deserves your words. Some people only understand your value once your presence is no longer available to them. Some lessons require distance. Some realizations require absence. And some people only recognize what they lost after they no longer have access to your energy. But by the time they finally understand it, your healing should already be underway. Not because you stopped caring overnight, but because you finally started caring about yourself too. And there is nothing more powerful than a person who was hurt deeply but chose growth instead of chaos. One of the hardest truths to accept after somebody leaves you for someone else is that your healing cannot depend on whether they come back. A lot of people stay emotionally stuck because deep down, they are still waiting for validation from the same person who hurt them. They say they want peace, but secretly they want revenge. They say they are moving on, but emotionally they are still hoping for a text message, an apology, or some dramatic realization where the other person finally understands their value. And listen carefully, as long as your happiness depends on somebody else regretting their decision, you are still emotionally attached to the pain. That is why emotional independence is so powerful. Emotional independence means your peace no longer depends on another person's choices. It means you stop allowing somebody else's actions to control your confidence, your mood, your self-worth, and your future. And that kind of freedom changes everything. See, heartbreak makes people do dangerous things emotionally. Some people become obsessed with proving they were the better option. Others try to make the person jealous. Some jump into new relationships just to avoid loneliness. And many spend months or years replaying old memories instead of building a new life. But the strongest people eventually realize something important. Chasing validation from the person who broke you will never truly heal you. You cannot build self-worth through somebody else's approval. That is temporary. Real confidence is built internally. It comes from knowing who you are, even when somebody fails to appreciate you. It comes from understanding that rejection does not define your value. And most importantly, it comes from learning how to stand emotionally on your own feet. Now, let me be clear. Emotional independence does not mean you stop loving people. It does not mean you become cold, detached, or incapable of relationships. It simply means you no longer lose yourself inside them. That is the difference. Too many people make relationships their entire identity. Their happiness becomes dependent on texts, attention, reassurance, and constant validation. So when the relationship ends, they feel empty because they forgot how to exist outside of that emotional attachment. And heartbreak forces them to face themselves again. That is why this season of pain can actually become one of the greatest transformations of your life if you handle it correctly. Instead of spending all your energy trying to figure out why somebody left, start asking yourself better questions. What parts of yourself did you neglect? What dreams did you put on hold? How much of your peace did you sacrifice trying to keep somebody happy? How often did you ignore your intuition? How much of your identity became attached to being chosen? Those questions lead to growth, because emotional independence begins the moment you stop seeing yourself as incomplete without another person. You were somebody before them. You had value before them. You had purpose before them. And you will continue becoming even greater after them. But to reach that level mentally, you have to stop romanticizing people who failed to protect your heart. Sometimes we become addicted to potential instead of reality. We hold on to memories instead of truth. We remember the good moments so strongly that we ignore the disrespect, inconsistency, dishonesty, and emotional instability that came with them. And that emotional attachment keeps us trapped. But healing starts when you accept reality honestly instead of emotionally. If somebody truly wanted to stay, they would have stayed. If somebody truly valued your presence, they would not gamble with losing you. And if somebody walked away easily, you should stop fighting harder for them than they fought for you. That realization hurts, but it also frees you, because now your energy can finally return to yourself. Now, instead of losing sleep over somebody else's choices, you start rebuilding your own life. You focus on your health, your confidence, your discipline, your finances, your mindset, your goals, and your future. You start creating a life that feels meaningful even without the relationship. And that is where your power returns. See, emotional independence changes the way you love too. Once you heal properly, you stop loving from fear. You stop clinging desperately. You stop tolerating disrespect just because you are afraid to lose someone. You begin approaching relationships from a place of confidence rather than emotional survival. That changes everything. Because now you understand something deeply. Love should add to your life, not become your entire life. And let me tell you something beautiful about emotional independence. It makes you magnetic, not because you are pretending not to care, but because you genuinely stop chasing validation. Your energy becomes calmer. Your confidence becomes quieter. Your standards become stronger. You no longer beg for attention because you already recognize your own worth. And ironically, that is often when people who underestimated you begin noticing your value again. But by then, something inside you has changed. You are no longer desperate for their return. You are no longer emotionally controlled by their decisions. You are no longer waiting for closure to move forward, because you finally understand this truth. The best revenge is not making somebody suffer. The best revenge is becoming so emotionally strong, peaceful, and fulfilled that their absence no longer controls your happiness. That is real freedom. And once you experience that kind of peace, you will never again abandon yourself just to keep somebody else die. One thing people rarely talk about honestly is this. Relationships that begin with betrayal usually carry hidden cracks from the very beginning. On the surface, everything may look perfect. The pictures look happy. The excitement feels intense. The connection seems passionate and thrilling. And when you are the one who got left behind, it can feel like they rolled off into a better life while you were left alone carrying all the pain. But appearances can be dangerously misleading. What starts in disloyalty often creates instability underneath the surface, because the foundation was built through hurt, secrecy, emotional confusion, and broken trust. And no matter how exciting something begins, a weak foundation eventually reveals itself. See, when somebody leaves one relationship for another, especially through dishonesty or emotional betrayal, they usually carry unresolved habits and character patterns into the new situation. People love believing a new person automatically creates a new character, but that is not how emotional patterns work. If somebody avoids accountability, seeks constant validation, struggles with commitment, or chases excitement over stability, those issues do not magically disappear just because there is a new face involved. Eventually, reality arrives. And when reality enters the room, fantasy starts losing its power. In the beginning, the relationship may feel exciting because it is fueled by adrenaline, secrecy, ego, and emotional intensity. There is novelty, there is temptation, there is the illusion that this new connection is somehow more special because it was worth risking everything for. But over time, normal life begins to replace fantasy. Now bills exist, stress exists, communication problems exist, insecurities appear, trust issues emerge, and suddenly the same person who betrayed you must now convince somebody else that they can actually be trusted. Think about that. If a relationship started by hurting another person, somewhere in the back of both minds lives a quiet question. If they did this once, could they do it again? That uncertainty slowly creates emotional instability. Now jealousy grows easier. Now reassurance becomes necessary. Now suspicion enters ordinary situations. Now comparison begins. Because guilt and fear have a strange way of haunting relationships built on betrayal. And this is important for you to understand. Their relationship struggling later does not mean you should celebrate their pain. Holding on to bitterness only delays your own healing. The goal is not to sit around waiting for somebody else's downfall. The goal is to understand that what looked perfect from a distance was never as flawless as your heartbreak convinced you it was. When you are hurting, your mind often exaggerates what you lost. You begin imagining that they are happier than ever, more in love than ever, more fulfilled than ever. Meanwhile, you are sitting there questioning your value. But social media does not show emotional reality. People post highlights, not truth. They post smiles, not insecurity. They post moments, not the silent problems happening behind closed doors. And too many people torture themselves, comparing their pain to somebody else's curated image. You have to stop doing that. Because while you're busy watching them, life is waiting for you to rebuild yourself. And honestly, that is where your focus should be. Not on whether their relationship survives, not on whether they regret leaving, not on whether karma arrives tomorrow or 10 years from now. Your responsibility is your own growth. See, betrayal creates two choices. It can either make you bitter or make you wiser. Some people allow heartbreak to harden them completely. They stop trusting, stop loving, stop believing in genuine connection. They carry anger into every future relationship. But others use pain differently. They learn discernment. They raise their standards. They strengthen their boundaries. They reconnect with their self-worth. They stop settling for inconsistent love. And those people come out stronger. Because one painful relationship can teach lessons that completely transform your future if you're willing to grow from it instead of drowning in it. You begin noticing red flags earlier. You stop ignoring disrespect. You stop begging for bare minimum effort. You stop sacrificing your peace just to avoid being alone. That growth is valuable. And let me tell you something else most people realize too late. The person who got left is not always the person who lost. Sometimes the real loss belongs to the one who walked away from loyalty, peace, emotional safety, and genuine love, chasing temporary excitement. Sometimes people do not recognize value until life removes access to it. And by the time they fully understand what they gave up, the other person has already healed, evolved, and emotionally moved on. That is why your healing matters more than revenge. Because the greatest victory after betrayal is not watching somebody else fail. The greatest victory is becoming somebody stronger than the version of yourself that once accepted less than you deserve. Imagine reaching a point where their choices no longer disturb your peace. Imagine waking up without checking their social media. Imagine genuinely smiling again without pretending. Imagine becoming so emotionally grounded that you no longer need closure from the people who hurt you. That is freedom. And the beautiful thing about freedom is this. Once you truly heal, you stop seeing the breakup as the destruction of your life. You begin seeing it as redirection. Sometimes losing somebody protects you from wasting years in a situation that would have eventually broken your spirit anyway. Sometimes heartbreak removes people who were never fully aligned with your future. And sometimes pain is the very thing that forces you to finally choose yourself. That is why you cannot let betrayal convince you that your story is over. No. Sometimes the collapse of one relationship becomes the beginning of your strongest chapter yet. So at the end of the day, stop crying over people who had the privilege of experiencing your love and still chose to take it lightly. Stop thinking their decision was the final statement about your worth. It was not. It was simply a reflection of where they were mentally, emotionally, and spiritually at that moment in their life. And one day, you're going to look back at this heartbreak differently. Not as the moment your life fell apart, but as the moment you finally woke up. Because pain has a strange way of introducing you to your